Are you ready?
Not yet. It's still going live. Just give me a second. I'll let you know when it does it. All right, we are live.
Great, thank you, Renata. And would it be okay if I start off by, should I start with roll call and then, did we lose Renata? Are you still there?
Oh, no.
Well, while we wait for her to come back, I think I would just like to introduce myself. Obviously, my name is right there. I'm Bernadette Conway. It's great to see everybody here tonight. And 2 years ago, my commission expired, my term expired, and we didn't have the seats to reappoint me. So I am a de facto member. I'm not an official member. So when, for the past few years, I did not realize that as the de facto member and de facto chair of the committee, that it was up to me to call, that I could still call meetings and run meetings and all of that. So, it's a little confusing to me, but I think this is Renata here. She was the one who reached out to me about the grant and explained to me that even as a de facto chair, I can call a meeting and run it. So here we are. And I apologize if, you've been appointed in this time and we haven't had a meeting. I just didn't really understand those rules. So Renata, it looks like you're back.
I am. At least I'm trying to. It keeps on dropping me. All right. So this is one of the 4 regularly scheduled meetings of the Open Space Committee. This committee had met and had actually met with a quorum last time before I started working with the town. And I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong in this, but to best of my understanding, when you met last, you were developing a map of open space inventory parcel. And then that map got incorporated into the plan of conservation and development. And there was some understanding that, perhaps your role was sort of came to an end or was sort of wrapping up. And that perhaps was the reason why the committee did not meet as often or whatever had happened meanwhile. However, as the time went by, I looked through the plan of conservation and development, and it occurs to me, and again, correct me if I'm wrong with this, that there is number of charges under that. If you look on that open space document that I sent to you, there is a number of things that you as a committee are still charged with doing. And as a matter of fact, for us, for the town to be competitive in, especially for like seeking grants, which is why I brought in Sonia Richmond, our grant writer here tonight. We need to not only identify what are the open space parcels, but we need to work more in identification on what parcels we would like to preserve as an open space, which methods we should use to do that, and then how to accomplish that, develop maps, plans. Part of that is in the POCD. Part of what we could do perhaps isn't even in POCD, but there is a lot of what you could as a committee still do in order to help us be more competitive with grants for land acquisition. And also because one of the obvious elements in the POCD is that the town had a desire to preserve some open space, or at least develop some kind of way to preserve areas that are valuable. There was, as everybody knows, a lot of development that has happened within the last few years. Development and open space do not always have to be at conflict with one another. If there is a plan to do that, you know, as a matter of fact, concentrated development sometimes preserves open space, but there needs to be a good plan to get all that done. So that's kind of why I was a little bit nervous, and I kept on pushing for let's meet, let's meet, let's meet. We got notification for DEEP for funding, and that's why I guess I kind of summoned everybody and urged you to meet. By the way, did you do the roll call yet?
No, I explained somewhat, you know, to them what you explained to me, that I'm still the de facto chair. So I guess I will still be running the meeting unless you should be running the meeting.
No, you will be running the meeting.
Okay. All right. So let's start with roll call.
All right. If you want, I can read the names for you.
That would be great, because I don't know who all the appointees are at this point.
Sure. Sandra Austin Goldstein.
Here.
Gilbert Dacre.
Here.
Bernadette Conway.
Here.
Mitchell Page. He's absent. Gia Pasquarelli.
Here.
Also present are Renata Bertati and Sonia Richmond as staff.
Gil, could you pull down your shade? All we see is a big sunball where you are. There you are.
I have no shade. I have. Okay.
Thank you, Gail. So next on the agenda is the approval of agenda. Has everybody reviewed it? And does anybody have any changes or additions for the agenda? And
I wasn't at that meeting. Can I vote on it, or do I have to abstain?
well, this is just for this agenda for today's meeting. So I think, yeah, so you're not being at the last meeting, I don't think matters for this meeting's agenda, unless I'm wrong, Renata.
You're not wrong, no.
Okay, so hearing no further questions, I'll take a motion to accept this agenda, approve this agenda.
I move we accept the agenda, approve the agenda.
And thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion or additions anybody would like to make? Okay, hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? All right, so the agenda is approved. We can move to public comments. I don't think we have anyone from the public here. Is Noreen a member of the public, or?
Noreen is a recording secretary and we have nobody in attendance.
Okay. So the minutes from everybody, I believe, received in a packet, the minutes from the last meeting. And it was hard to believe, looking back, that it was back on September 12th, 2019. It was certainly a different world back then in many ways. And I know so, it was really, go ahead.
If I may, just through chair advise Ms. Goldstein, you are accepting minutes. You are not necessarily witnessing that they're accurate or anything to that effect. So at this point, you can vote even if you did not attend the meeting, as long as you read them.
Mhm.
So if you read them, you can accept them.
Thank you.
And if you're not, if anyone's not comfortable with that, you could always.
You don't have to.
abstain. But does anybody have any questions about the minutes? Okay, so hearing no questions, I will take a motion to accept the minutes from the September 12th, 2019 meeting.
Move to accept.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further questions or additions? And hearing none, all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? And motion passes. Okay, the documents, okay, so you had the documents, it has listed the OSC minutes, which we just approved. Were there any other documents? I know you said you sent a document and I think I might have missed it. The plan, did you send something?
I didn't get anything either.
In the packet, you should have received page 28 out of Plan of Conservation and Development,
Yep.
which includes open space strategies. And I also included an email from Councilor Berdeka to the town council, on which I was recipient as well as the town manager, in which she recommended a certain land area to be looked at for the preservation and perhaps as a property for which we could seek funding or grants.
I don't think I received that email in my packet.
Okay,
I
then-
do have the.
Then I
open
may
space-
not, then maybe it wasn't sent to you because I attached it to my thing and I wasn't sure. I remember thinking of whether or not I should send this to the committee. And if I didn't send it to you, then I probably at the time decided it wasn't appropriate for me to send it to you, but we can talk about it anyways. In an order of business, are we at new business now?
It appears so, yeah.
Okay. So before we get to this email, which is relevant because that's what in a way triggered the grant conversation. Would you like to go over the POCD, these actions first, or would you like to jump into like everything together?
I think that's a great idea. I think we should follow the agenda for now, and then we'll get into the email if that's okay with
Yes.
everybody.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm assuming you're going to present the past actions.
So with the policies in the open space strategies, there is a electronic file in the open space committee folder that includes number of things dated back 2010 and 2016. I do not know exactly how did this committee left it, but from the best that I can surmise it is that at some point prior to adoption of the 2020 Plan of Conservation and Development, the Open Space Committee developed an open space inventory list and it created a definition of an open space, which then ended up, there is a discussion in the POCD essentially talking about that definition and perhaps reworking it and trying to do something else with the definition itself. Then there are these policies and strategies and specific action steps. And in particular, under the action steps, under action step number 2, there is a recommendation in the plan that says consider preparing an open space plan that inventories existing open space spaces by ownership and type. I think you accomplished that. I have some kind of map that indicates to me that, and there is a spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet. So perhaps that is something where you want to start by looking and seeing if that needs update. You know, I would imagine that some property owners changed, you know, that might need some looking at. Then under B, it says identified open space linkages and greenway corridors. There is a 2010 map that actually shows some arrows that might be what this was getting at, but it is essentially 2 or 3 pretty general kind of like through the town areas. So I don't know if this B section is finalized, or is this something that you would like to start looking in more detail? And before your next meeting, I'm going to, you know, if this is what we want to talk about, like these are the documents that I'm going to send you, and then we can look into this. And then thirdly, it identified the desired future open space properties. I do not have a map. I do not have a document. I was not able to find anything to that effect. Identifies desired future open space properties. I did not see that. So I'm looking at Councilor Berdeka, and she looks perplexed, which leads me to believe there is something.
And I was just going to say to Bernadette, didn't we once on the identified list, there were like 30 properties. Didn't we prioritize like the top 10 or something?
Yeah, I thought we did too, and it might be when we review the inventory, it might be an order of prioritizing, or is it when we look at it, I think we'll be able to figure out, is it in order of the size, or is it in order of prioritization? So I think that's where we should move next, is taking a look at what we've identified, and also the Greenway Trail. We did do that, and I see you're laughing, Gail,
remember the walk through the
well, and a lot of this is, I don't remember a lot of it. I mean, I remember doing it, and I know we have it all documented. It would be necessary, even though I was there for all of these meetings. I think it's necessary to review, for me anyway. You probably have a better memory than I, Gail, but I think it would be very useful for all of us to review.
The prior town planner, Bernadette, and I think maybe one other, we bushwhacked our way through some of these greenway things, the old 291 bypass and some other areas, and to try and identify what we can do with them, if we can do anything with them. But I think you're right, Renata. I think I certainly need a refresher. It's been 3 years.
I am wondering if it would be helpful for us to meet actually in person, within next few months. And then I can, on my computer, like display all the files, and we can go through like link by link, open all the maps, open all the spreadsheets, and see what is it that you remember being what. Because to me, all I see is like 2016 date with like a random description. I can't quite tell which one is what. That's part of the problem. I don't understand like what's behind the actual map. So I think maybe we can do that. And, we now have capacity to show these maps on big, large screens, and we can do a meeting in one of the conference rooms at town hall.
How does everybody feel about that? Is everybody comfortable meeting in person? Because that is how we did all of this to begin with. We met in the room, and Chris Miner projected it on the big screen, and it was really helpful to do that. We really got a really good feeling for the parcels, and a little bit more so than just seeing it on a little screen. So if everyone is comfortable meeting in person, and I think we can absolutely safely do it in a good sized room. We don't we can sit
We
further
don't
apart
have to
and
sit exactly next to
have
one
it up on the
another.
big screen.
Exactly, we can
So,
spread it
yeah,
out.
I think the next meeting should definitely be in person and we can review it.
Okay.
Renata, do you know, because I saw James earlier this week just to get up to speed on some open space things, and I met with him and he was able to go into his town computer and we sort of went behind like what the green colored things were and to find out, like, to identify them, so I would know like which one was a town piece, which one was a state piece, which, belonged to what company. If we're able to sort of do that work, is there a way to integrate it into the town computer so it'll last and sort of be available to us as a reference? Like if we're going to go through that work of like seeing behind, I think that's what you're saying, like seeing behind like what the identified pieces are, like something that's colored green, like what is that parcel? Who does it belong to? What size is it? If we're going to go through identifying it, is there a way to incorporate it into the state's database?
I don't necessarily know about state database. That would,
Well, the
depends
town
on whether
database, the one that you and
our,
James-
yes, our,
Yeah.
absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we can add layers to our.
Oh, cool.
So I think on this, I will return to the point of prioritization in a moment, but let's now turn, if you don't mind, let's turn to the grant discussion so that Sonia can do this and leave. Sonia, did you want to say something?
I don't know how to put my hand down.
Oh,
Okay.
did you do
So,
that
yeah.
by
I
accident?
think it's
No,
under-
I did put it up. I just wanted to, while you were in that mode of prioritization, to crosswalk, I could come up with, help you come up with a matrix that will help identify the land parcels that are most likely going to be competitive, because it is a competitive application. So the
That
markers,
would be helpful, yes.
yeah. So I'll put together a chart, and you can go through and, like the things that are going to make something really super competitive, for example, is if it's near, of course, water, water that is useful water. So there's all different, our near trail that's going to maintain public access. So there's all different ranking criteria for consideration. So I can help the committee make recommendations that are going to be likely, funded by an outside source. And the other thing is, I think the grant is due September 20th. So I would look to the committee to please meet pretty regularly between now and mid-August. So you have your property selected, so we could put an application in within 3 weeks. I don't think it's going to be too horrible, but you never know with vacations and stuff like that. So try to get together, and I'll give you a list over the weekend to jumpstart it and help start your thinking about which property in your mind, because you're probably familiar with the town, obviously, and the properties, and that kind of gets you into the frame of mind, like which properties are going to be likely candidates that will be not only, beyond preservation, it will be a way we can fund it without using town money.
Now, do you have a parcel in mind?
Do
So,
I, me personally, or is that directed to me?
You or Renata?
I do not. I leave that up to the towns. This is the subject matter experts. So my guidance is only going to be in terms of what you recommend to me. I can only guide you in terms of if it's going to be a compelling competitive ask. So you put together. So in other words, your favorite piece of property that you have in mind might not be the most compelling state request. So I can just make recommendations in that direction. It's up to the committee to determine based on, we'll try to make for example, I don't know if you're familiar with what Renata's been doing in terms of the Newington Junction.
No.
Okay, so that's a
familiar.
project that we're looking at, and we looked at all areas of town before we settled on using that parcel, because we knew we could there's many worthy projects, but it was a compelling ask for multiple reasons. And, the historic value, the geographical location, number of foot traffic that was going to pass through in terms of school locations. So there's all those different things that made it and we'll be able to get additional funding based on the criteria of public use and preservation. So this one is kind of the same thing. It would be a little bit different bent around, how it will preserve natural resources and what it means to the town. So a little bit different criteria, but not divorced from that. Like it still has some trail aspects to it and how the public will use the space and stuff like that. And the number of people, Newington's, a piece of property that borders multiple towns is going to have more access, public access. So different things like that will come up with a matrix and ranking, help rank the parcels, and hopefully will make a compelling case to the state for funding to Connecticut.
Bernadette, I wrote, when I heard that these grants were available and we weren't working, I wrote an email actually to Keith and Renata with my suggestion. And I think that's the email she was referring to.
Yes.
Regarding Cedar Mountain, because Cedar Mountain, and then I outlined what I thought would be compelling reasons. I don't know whether you can read it, Renata.
Yes, I have it here. So the email reads, we all know that Newington has very little open space. Of particular interest to residents is Cedar Mountain. When Cedar Mountain was threatened by a proposed luxury housing development, residents turned out in significant numbers to oppose this development. That plan was stopped, but risks to this valuable property still remain. Preservation of Cedar Mountain was highlighted in Newington 2020 Plan of Conservation and Development and again in the 2030 POCD. There are many reasons for Newington to pursue additional acquisitions of land on the mountain, including but not limited to recreational value for trails and hiking, environmental buffer between the pollutants and traffic on the Berlin Turnpike and the town, one of 7 trap rock ridge lines in Connecticut providing habitat for unusual plants and animals. There are like 2 or 3 identified like vernal pool areas up there. Located in the highly developed Hartford-Newington corridor, and it's important to wildlife as one of few local places for cover, food, and water needs and services as resting spot for birds during migration. The land is adjacent to an existing parcel of town-owned open space. Newington must be mindful of all opportunities to preserve Cedar Mountain, since areas on the mountain are still attractive to developers and remain at risk for development. Ownership of land north of Route 175 is fragmented, including the state of Connecticut, both Hillcon, private owners, and the town of Newington. And then it goes on more, but these are essentially the main reasons. So when this original notice of funding opportunity came out, I was really worried that, while we have areas that we could apply for, really the only place that we might be competitive for, in my mind too, is Cedar Mountain. There was at some point some kind of public outreach that was done there. Maybe it wasn't public outreach, but at least there is a documentation that we can use to show that indicates that people are interested in preserving that. It's shown in the Plan of Conservation and Development. That's going to be important to Sonia when she applies for this.
Can you remind me of the date of the POCD? What year is that?
One was in 2020 and one was in 2010.
Okay, because it has to be less than 10 years old, so we're okay.
It was in 2020. They just did
okay. They
started.
Updated it. Okay, I just want to make sure. Because I heard 2010, and then pretty much Gail's letter goes through and hits. For an example, she hits all the highlights of the requirements of the grant. I don't know, Gail, if you had gone through the grant application and picked off the list, but that pretty much is everything.
Sonia, but the.
From past, trying to, from past experience, I figured the only thing that's, missing is a waterway, but
the watershed piece,
But
The
we
issue,
have the vernal
Sonia,
pools. We have the vernal pools.
the issue, Sonia, with this area is that there is like number of parcels.
Mhm.
And so somebody would remind me, like, some are owned by town, so we don't need to apply for grant. If we own it, we can preserve it. But then there are parcels that are owned by Tilcon, perhaps. And then who else might be owning up there?
I think Newcastle is the official name of the owner, not Tilcon
Mm.
anymore. I think Newcastle is the controlling the controlling company.
Right.
So that was the last I knew. And the state owns some as well.
Right.
Now, and can I just ask, it was my understanding when we went through this process initially back however many years ago, it was over a decade ago, when we went through the grant process, part of that process was the town had to be willing to purchase and put forth funds, and the seller had to be willing to sell. So I'm not sure if we meet all of that criteria, or has something changed along those lines? Can we just say, here's some grants, this is great, let's go for it, and reach out to the town councilors, and if they approve it, they can be the ones to do outreach and see if Newcastle or the state are willing to sell the property, to have, there has to be some kind of willingness on the town's part too. Is that correct, Sonia?
Yeah, it has to be, the town has to agree to certain conditions. It has to be preserved in perpetuity. There's certain conditions, it can't be put back on for development.
Right.
And there's, I'm looking through, I'm trying to figure out if I have to look through and see if there's a match requirement or what the requirement of the cost is, but I'll put that as part of the grant summary.
Because do we even know which portion, or we need to figure that out, which portion, or the whole kit and caboodle, or
That would be up
we're
to
going
that.
for?
Yeah, that would be a recommendation in my mind. It'd be a recommendation from the committee as the subject matter experts to the town.
Yeah.
Based on the research that you did. You'd go to the town for the recommendation, and then the town would of course be the applicant through it, but it would be based on the facts that you have at hand, which is the plan of conservation and development, and any other information that is gleaned from the property itself to make a compelling case to the town. So kind of Gail did a preemptive strike, a little bit in terms of setting up that particular piece. But it's always good to do the due diligence, to have the data about the other properties, so you can do a comparison and show why this particular property ranks higher than the other ones. So they have all the info. It's not just, you threw a dart kind of thing, that you made a conscious effort to do the due diligence behind it. So that would be taking a look at the properties you've had identified before, running them against, ranking them, taking each, I'm picturing, the property and having the matrix and checking off whether it meets that certain criteria. And then something was going to rise to the top. And Cedar Mountain sounds like it's going to, it just basically hits all those costs. So I think that's going to be at least a competitive.
Cedar Mountain was the impetus for this whole committee.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, and, it's always good to have this stuff just stacked up, because, these come out, there's other opportunities I could be looking at too, for preservation or trails. It all feeds, all this data and information all feeds into the one story of town of Newington. So everything you do, don't ever feel like anything you're doing is wasted. Even the stuff that's a little bit dated, at least you're not starting from zero. So you're starting from a good, you have a good starting point. And there's other preservation grants too, like we'll just keep building. The goal is to loop and constantly layer funding on top of successful funding things. So that's what I'd be looking to this committee to do. And I'm going to, of course, support it, because my capacity to write a compelling grant is based on the subject matter experts' ability to pull information together. So I hope that I can join again.
And I don't know. So on our end, honestly, I don't know if we're going to be able to put everything that we need to put together in the time to have this application in time. But I don't know that even matters that much, because I think even if we somehow cannot produce this, or if we produce it and we don't get this particular grant, there is still quite a bit of value in this exercise, because this is the property, for example, where that CERT team was used to come in to evaluate the properties. One of the things that I would really like to see an open space committee do is, as you prioritize your other properties, is engage them, because they're a free service to the town, and they will come and do properties that you identify free of charge as long as there is no threat, as long as it's not controversial. Like, you can't do that when there is a proposed development, then they won't get involved in it. But if we're in planning stages and we're planning to preserve something, they're more than happy to come in, do their ERT reviews, and then we have documentation that we need for grant for that piece of land. So, there is quite a bit of what we can do to set us in a much better shape with all of this.
Yeah, it's a very important committee in terms of setting the baselines of everything. It just starts with town input. That's what the government, any funding source, a state or federal government, wants to know, that it wasn't just one person's idea, that it's the idea of the public. So this commission is really, really super key in putting that out there. And then, like Renata said, draw on you guys are the decision makers and the aggregator of the data. Through the aggregation of the data, you're the decision makers, but you can draw on the resources that are available to help you to get there. And there are more, that's their mission, is to provide, that's what they're set up to do.
In terms of like Cedar Mountain, for example, there's multiple owners. I mean, going back to what Bernadette had said earlier, we want it, but we don't know at this point how much each parcel would cost, what the willingness is of, would Ball sell an acre, 2 acres, no acres? Would I don't know, who's the other, would the state be willing to, sell off some excess property? I mean, we need that before we can put a grant together. Is there would the assessor be able to, first of all, assess what these parcels are worth, and then somebody would contact the current owners and say, if something happened, blah, 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 would you be willing to consider selling? I mean, who would do that?
Well, I was just thinking, why couldn't it be us? To a certain extent. I mean, if we as a committee approach like Balf, Capital Pipe, Jensen Machine, the businesses that are there, and just said, hey, we're the open space committee and we'd like to talk about, I mean, we could also talk to them about not only their future plans, so we can get sort of in on the ground floor sort of thing, but also kind of to encourage them to preserve and protect the land and not have to, so it doesn't go into remediation status and things like that. It just could sort of be a goodwill community thing.
I'm not sure if that's within our purview to be the ones approaching owners. It was my understanding in the past that it has to be someone from the town who has the authority, because we have certain authority over, identifying and making recommendations, and that's pretty much where it ends.
And we can't negotiate on
Right. So actually reaching out and negotiating and
It wouldn't be
without,
negotiating so much as building goodwill so that if, they were thinking about selling, who would they think about to sell to, but, but the town.
it's,
Andre, you make too much common sense for government.
I think it would be up to,
It's town manager,
Our
this
town
is kind of a situation where that, this is up to town manager. It's not even something where like as a
We don't want to put the commission in any kind of negotiation
Mm.
position.
right? So it
Mhm.
will go, but everything that Sandra, is it Sandra or Sandra? How do you say it?
Sandy's good.
Okay. Sandy was saying that with all that, we need all that information. It's a matter of, and what Gail was, or I think it was Gail, was like, who does that? And it's kind of hand in glove. The town manager can't have a conversation unless he has the due diligence behind the information. So digging through and pulling together the matrix. There, we can certainly work with the town assessor to see what the taxes were paid, see if look on any list to see if there's any brownfield, if it's any, the Jensen, I imagine that would be a brownfield. Give all the information. And then also, as we're starting the process, say, this is what we're thinking. Here's the data points that we have. What else should we be considering before as part of a recommendation? So draw him in early so that he can, if he's going to advocate on our behalf to put this forth as a grant, he'll have to be all in the know. And he's and I'm trying to think of who else with the town, besides the town manager, would have an interest in maybe, someone in Parks and Recs too, as far as how it'd be used. There's not too much, you can't collect too much information ever. What you end up putting in a grant will get picked through. But you're trying to make a story here as to why, or the rationale is your story about why this particular property is worthy of state funding, and why it's more worthy than your neighbor's funding. So and part of that is it has municipal support left, right, and center, like no doubt. And in order to have that, we'll have to work together with the town manager and present him that this is something that the commission is going to recommend. And before we go too far down the road, what other things should we be taking into consideration? Those kind of conversations. And anybody else, Renata is pretty key here too, because as the town planner, she's one of
So So with all this in mind, and I don't know, do you think, Sonia, it's realistic to believe that we're going to get all of this done by September 20?
If I think what the first thing we have to do is at least have the minimum information within like a week's time, because we're already, I always think the month we're in grant writing, you always say the month you're in is the month is over, right? So we really only have 6 weeks to do it, really. We want to make sure that everything's done right. And then also with the timing of town council meetings for any kind of approvals that we have to have. So just that. So I would give the town manager a heads up right away, say the commission has reconvened. We're considering this opportunity. I'll give you a summary of the grant and the reasons why we think we have an opportunity and our proposed next steps. And that would get the town on board, because if the town, the earlier they're on board with the commissions, the better.
So you will give me an email with.
I'll give you an email summary by
steps,
Monday. Yeah, Monday morning you'll have an email summary, a summary of the grant.
So in that, do we want in that email also these steps as to this is what we need? Reach out to whatever is the name of the new Tilcon
right.
people.
So we'll have all this from the town on the due diligence that we expect to collect, and recommendations from the town as well of what kind of information they'll want to see in our decision making. We know from what the grant requires, but that doesn't mean whatever the grant requires might not necessarily jive with what the town would put on, for open space. So, they might have, we have to work together as a community and say, okay, so this would be based on the criteria for the grant and the criteria for this committee, for example, might not jive. There might be additional criteria that the committee comes up as a tiebreaker. So that kind of thing. So I don't know, you might want to say vicinity to schools or something like that would be a tiebreaker for open space, or a vicinity to the, so there might be some sort of additional criteria beyond, the grant is what's going to make it fitting in those blocks is what's going to make it palatable for the funding. But it also it can't just be, you don't write for the funding, right? You write you don't squeeze, you don't want the tail to wag the dog. You don't want to squeeze the opportunity to fit the funding. It's can't be mutually exclusive. So whatever.
So what you're saying is we need a story, right? We need a story.
You need a story behind,
right.
Yeah. So and the story would be the town is behind it, and this is the reason why the town is behind it, and it fits the criteria of the federal grants, and also it fits the town's criteria beyond the grant. So that's your story. The town believes it's a good idea based on the recommendations of the committee that fits the criteria of the Connecticut Deep Grant, and also is in our POCD and meets our expectations for X, Y, and Z. So, you always want to take it one step beyond in your rationale. It fits everything perfectly, because if it doesn't, it's not going to score, it's not going to rank. You want to get it as high as you can, get it ranked. And then what's going to push you over the edge is that the compelling story behind the usage above and beyond the expectations of the state. Does that make sense? So just like when you did the Newington Junction, it fit all the criteria, and we said it's going to be part of a trail system, and it's near a school, so we had all those ands, so it fit all the buckets there. And then more.
If we just went by like what the criteria is and then looked at the land that's available, we could then decide what is the highest ranking piece and what one we have the most likelihood to.
Right. Yeah. So right. So exactly. That's what you want. You want to find the one that's going to rank, but then to make it even more compelling. Because remember, everybody, if 169 towns, say 50 towns submit, and 25 all score the same, what's going to push it over the edge, right? What's going to make, so you want to stand out in some particular way, because everybody could score 100. And then what are they going to do? Then what's the criteria to break that? So you kind of want to push in a little bit more about how holistically it matters to the community and how it was chosen, and those little extra points in there.
Yeah, I think like what Gail was saying about, like the particular, like the reports that are out there about the particular birds, the particular, animals, the particular plants would be.
That all matters. That all matters. Those natural inventories. I don't know if we've ever had one done. Those, forget what they call it, where they go through and do a inventory, plant inventory and animal inventory.
So that matters. I think it's going to help us that we're a dense community, so we're not like, Burlington, right? So we have a lot of people living next to this little area of, habitat, of preservation. So that helps a lot.
I've been using for Newington, and this has worked pretty well in terms of, it's not the Newington residents are one population that's served by open space, but also it's our neighboring cities. We're between New Britain. So any parcels along that way is going to be, like, I'm sure that came into mind when they were doing the cleanup, which is right on the edge of New Britain there in the major highway. So it's point, the state's not going to bring it to the attention of the ranking committee. We have to bring it to the attention of the ranking committee. So if we don't say it, they're not going to assume it. So that all that kind of stuff, and we can't get, that's why I say whatever the state asks for, you give them that plus, and that will help.
Another thing is that this is not a piece of land that's in the center of Newington. This land is bordered by Hartford and Wethersfield, as well as Newington. So in that instance, it's going to be really a regional asset. And the fact that the state isn't met its 21%. I think they had that, the state itself had a goal of having 21% of open space, and it hasn't reached it. So this would be contributing to their, not just for a particular town, but like for a region. So yeah, I mean, I just,
Yeah, all that matters, all that helps, you know, because if you look at what other people are considering, we want to differentiate ourselves and fill as many, you know, check up as many boxes as we can. And even, you know, the ones that they mentioned, yeah, absolutely. And then what else?
I would just like to recognize Gia. You had your hand up and you were waiting patiently. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'm thinking about this process and the timeline, and it's a pretty tight timeline. And I think we all kind of agree. It sounds like, I mean, I agree with the interest in Cedar Mountain, but it's got a complication, right? There's multiple owners, and it might be a lot to put together, maybe in this timeline. I'm not saying we shouldn't shoot for it, but I'm wondering if simultaneously we should explore some of the other properties that I know were already ranked, and we're going to at some point, I guess, get together and be able to see what those properties that were identified previously by this committee. And then, because I'm wondering if just maybe if we get to a certain point where we think that this Cedar Mountain might not work, we would have something else in our back pocket. Just thinking to not lose out on something, because maybe, you know, maybe next year you come back and you try to go for the gold. And I might be missing some part of this and the process or how these things work, because I'm also new to this committee, but I just wanted to mention that because I think, you know, in any case, the grant timeline seems to be the most important thing.
Thank you. A lot of good points there. Yeah. The good news is we've done a lot of work already. And I think when we get together, we'll be able to make some quick decisions after reviewing the rankings and the work that's been done, identifying these open spaces. And my question I would have is, how much is the grant for? Is there a specific amount tied to it? And I'm not sure who can answer that question.
I do not know offhand. I don't even know that there is like a exact amount of money that's tied to
there
it.
is a maximum, and it's certainly not enough to buy Cedar Mountain. But that's why if we could fragment it and identify a parcel, whatever, but it would never be enough. From what I remember, it definitely would be not enough for the whole mountain. So.
All right, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so this is the open space folder. And this timeline for the grant is kind of tight. Your next meeting is probably after September 20th. Your next committee meeting is after the September 20th, unless you schedule some kind of special meeting. So I think honestly, like, not to be like raining on everybody's parade, but going for Cedar Mountain is a kind of tough stretch, and I don't know if that's going to be realistically like happening in the time for the deadline. Going for some other parcel is even less likely to actually materialize in that time, unless you now start scheduling special meetings like every week. And all that being said, these grants come out like every 6 months or every year or every so often. So, you know, this is this one thing now that kind of spurred the conversation, but it's not end all be all kind of situation. I think we just need to establish like a realistic working schedule and get going with this, rather than trying to like, if that makes any sense. So this is the folder. this is the folder. So if you guys see something in here, which could lead us to a map that shows these other parcels that we could talk about. Do you see
Well,
anything?
No, but I know two of the parcels that we identified are already gone. One of them was the Peckham Farm
Yeah.
and the other is Culver Street.
Mm-hmm.
So two of our top 10 are, in the past 3 years, are gone.
So for as far as the funding goes, I'm looking, trying to see if there's a cap on the value. But grants are awarded on the fair market value as determined by DEEP and will not exceed the following amounts. It's like 65 to 75%, 65% in a regular community, 75% in a municipality that's a distressed or a targeted investment community, or if it's a nonprofit land conservation organization within the municipality. So it's about 65%, and the town would have to find sources of funding to come up with the balance of that. That's not already like a federal source or state source gleaned from a federal funding. So I don't know. I was trying to look before the meeting to find what the cap is, but I can't find a cap right now. But it's also a consideration. We might want to do a little bit of math when we tell the town, this is, if we have the fair market value, or if we know what it is, what the town would expect as far as a match requirement, and how we would come up to. You don't have to use town money. You can do foundation money, and that's something else we could talk about, is reaching out to area conservation foundations and to see if they would help support. But that would be like, I think if we could put a toe in this one and come up with a smaller parcel on Cedar Mountain. We basically don't have enough information to make an informed decision or recommendation. So that, like the steps I was saying, just to get us going until I get you the summary, is tomorrow to reach out to Keith and say, this is, the town manager, and say, this is under consideration. They'll, what information we're planning to give you information. You can either wait till we pull together, if you have anything in mind that we want to consider as we're pulling together a matrix of space. And if we did something smaller on this end and took a year to put together funding for conservation efforts from private sources, then it would take some of the pressure off the town. So there's this is kind of like, to me, this is ongoing. This is like the historical side ship out. Every year you can get something, you just keep asking. And you just keep layering and don't give up, because this is kind of like the commission's mission, to preserve space. So you just kind of keep going until something's going to hit. But if you do it in an informed way, you should be able to get something.
I have two things. One is, Sonia and Renata, do you have access to, if memory serves, within each town, they have distressed segments in neighborhoods? Do you have maps of-
Newington doesn't have any.
We don't have that.
No,
You don't.
Weathersfield does, Rocky Hill does, New Britain, Hartford. Newington is like a solid, but that's why I've been using town usage. So I put it kind of like other information on all the other grants. I say, that we're so tightly packed. It works really well on federal money, because they tend to see Connecticut as one county. They don't see lines as much as we do here. So I'm hoping to kind of use that same mentality a little bit with the state, to say that, the area serves, especially if anything that's a parcel on a border.
Okay. And the other thing I had was, if we're going to be talking with Keith about approaching businesses, it doesn't for sure have to be an all or nothing thing. Is that something that we could consider to, like, as far as like, if we, offer him our opinion of how it should be handled? If we could get a chunk of something or a strip of something versus like the whole piece, which we wouldn't get, but little by little by little, you're going to build. So if we can get, even another chunk of Cedar Mountain, we would definitely take that. So I don't know if, like, say, for example, like Capital Pipe, if he wanted to talk to Capital Pipe and say, hey, would you consider selling off, this green space that you have over here, this lawn or something like that, versus like, we don't want the whole thing, but, and then that also puts the piece into their minds, it's like, oh, we could do this for the town. This is important. This is something that they want.
So that would be something that would be like really valuable to, I think, to me and whoever is going to talk to Keith. I think it is kind of important to have a clear understanding from the committee, and then either have a committee chair or a representative from the committee speak to Keith together with me about these kind of things, because, this is important for him to understand. We are talking about a parcel, we are talking about the area or opportunity for something, so that he has better understanding than as to when he talks to others about this. So I don't want to, I will tell him tomorrow that we're discussing this, but I will really not go into too much detail at this point until the committee kind of gives me a little bit more of a direction.
Would we be able to invite him to one of our meetings to discuss this, or do you think it's better for you to meet with him with representatives from this committee?
You can invite him into one of your meetings. Why not? The issue is one of your meetings are like every 3 months. Your regular meetings are scheduled. You have 4 in a year. So unless you schedule like a special meeting, your next meeting is not coming up anytime soon.
Right. All right. So that should be the next item. It is not on our agenda. I don't think I need to make a motion to add it to the agenda. I think we can just go ahead and talk about how often we think we should meet, or we can at least start with maybe in 2 weeks, we can set the date for our next meeting. I don't know if we should go ahead and say, let's meet every week or every 2 weeks. Why don't we start with 2 weeks from tonight? If that, does everyone want to look at their schedules? How does that sound to everyone, unless there's another suggestion?
Is that for the purposes of getting ready for the grant, or is that just in general, you feel like we need to, like, because that seems awfully frequent, like I think monthly would be good, unless it's specifically like about the grant, and then that would be the exception rather than the rule.
Well, because the grant is looming, I would say initially, I feel like, and I wouldn't be able to attend a meeting any more than once a month either. But initially, because of the stress of the timeline with the grant, I feel like we should get started in 2 weeks and do a review and prioritize, and we might be able to accomplish a lot in one meeting, because we did accomplish a lot already, just putting everything in order. And it might be enough for them to jump off, and talk to the town council and the town manager and prepare the grant. Am I rushing it too much, or do you think?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's better to measure twice and cut once. It seems like we've got a lot of groundwork to cover and a lot of prep to do. And I think it would be better to do it in a more managed, thoughtful, well thought out way, versus like rushing it. It's not like it's the only, like, granted it's coming up, but then there's another one 6 months behind it. I think if we do it half baked, it wouldn't be as good as if we waited.
Suggesting half baked. Any meeting that we have is going to be very productive.
So you think it's a realistic time frame?
About it, I think we'd be able to get a lot done, but it's fine if that's the way the rest of the committee feels too. I feel a sense of pressure from Sonia and Renata, or maybe
I don't want to pressure you. I think what the immediacy here right now is understanding what you have. You might have a layup. In other words, if we know what's available, we might have a layup grant. And conversely, we might have something that's not going to happen, and it's going to take a lot more time. But I think it's going to be much easier to find out within the next 2 weeks. So if you like once I summarize the grant, give you a little bit more idea of what's required, what are the priorities, and match them against that I think that's going to inform your next steps. So over that, collecting that information, giving you, I don't think you even have the data to make that decision, not tonight, right? So I think in 2 weeks, you'll have a better lay of the land. You'll have updated information. Like you said, there's 2 properties that rolled off. So once all that gets refreshed, you'll have input from Keith about his thinking. And it may or may not be, it might be something, it doesn't look horrible, this application in my mind. I've seen much worse. I've pulled together much worse in shorter times. But we also don't want to put anything in that's undercooked, right? So if it's going to be a way, something then we just stop and we'll put something in a more controlled way and manner. But I wouldn't let the deadline scare you, because sometimes it's just easy and sometimes it's not. And I'll be honest with you. I don't want to turn anything that's not going to be funded, right? I don't, it doesn't do anybody any favors. I don't want you to practice writing grants. I want you to actually get one. So if, when I go through and I always reach out to the program officers as much as I can, get as much information, and then you'll have and I think 2 weeks would be the right amount of time, in my opinion, if that works for you. And it is summer, and I recognize that as well with vacations and, this evening. So that would be my recommendation is put it together, have your information, and then make the call, say, to collectively, I'll be able to say, this is, you have something here that's gold mine, it's easy. And, the ownership is, not a problem, and it's going to be donated, or the owner wants to dump it for some reason, or their owner passed away. It's in a trust. There's a little bit of mysteries right there. We'll figure out.
I personally wouldn't mind meeting every if the deadline was doable and we could put together a good grant. I wouldn't mind meeting, every week. But if it's not, then we can, cut back. But I think in 2 weeks we'll have we'll just be more solid on, is the deadline doable? And I think that's what we're looking for now. And it's not, and Sandy, I get the meeting every 2 weeks. I don't want to commit anybody to that type of schedule at all, particularly if we have another year and a half for a grant. But if we really do have a shot and the information is there, I certainly would be willing to put myself on the line, and I know Bernadette would too, and I'm sure the rest of you feel Cedar Mountain. So I think in 2 weeks, right, there's going to be a lot more information that we have, and we're going to be able to make a decision. Is it worth busting for or not this year?
Yeah, that makes sense.
But between now and then, Bernadette or Renata or like what has to be done and who has to do what? I mean, is there anything we need to do? Is there, because the key to me is the financial, who are the property owners and the financials, and who's willing to make the calls? Or who, I don't know.
Well, Ed, let's just take a look at the schedule. If we're saying 2 weeks from tonight, that is Thursday, July 28th. Is this an agreeable night for the next meeting? And we'll do a review. I think we'll learn a lot at that meeting. Like you said, Gail, whether we have a good chance or not, and we can schedule the next meeting from that meeting. I know August and September is going to be tough for me, but I'll do what I can. If it looks like we can get something done with Cedar Mountain, this is the impetus to start again, and let's roll with it. So does the 28th sound good to everybody?
It does to me.
Yep, sounds good to me.
Works for me.
Okay, so let's set that
Works for me.
as the next special meeting. And Renata, you will.
I will
take care of-
advertise, and I will do the meeting part and put together.
Will that
everything.
be in person or will that be Zoom?
So I would like to do that in person so that I can then display that map and we can display the folder and we can go over like what's in that folder and what do I have to deal with, because some of this information will be relevant with our prioritization stuff, because I still can't decipher like what's what. Meanwhile, Sonia and I will talk about who owns which parcel, what kind of makes sense just from the look of it. We will perhaps have a little bit of conversation with Keith, see where that goes. Sonia will review the grant criteria and then see, if the grant criteria are so high, if we need to have all kinds of studies, plans, reports that we clearly don't, then we're dead in the water. We then just need to say, okay, this is what we need for next year. We need to dedicate some money, hire a consultant to prepare a plan for this. Like, then we have to.
There's like, for example, I know that when you're counting plants, it's like, this is the time you would do it because you can't do it in the dead of winter. So we, so there's all those little things. I'll take a closer look. I forget, what do you call those things when you count the plants and the trees and the bushes? But that has to be,
The Audubon Society does a yearly bird count on Cedar Mountain. I can get you the contact for that.
Mhm.
Can we use the information that when the Toll Brothers development was defeated, can we use the data, the conservation data from that
So
time?
we'll look into that. I mean, the vernal pool information is relevant. That kind of stuff doesn't really change that frequently. I mean, that was like 3 years ago. It's not like it was 2 centuries ago.
Right.
So that is going to still be relevant. Some of the stuff, perhaps we won't be able to use. So we will look into that and at least have those kind of answers.
You can kind of use like the plan of conservation and development. Those are required like every 10 years as kind of your litmus. If something is like within a 10-year time frame, it's generally pretty good. The thing about Newington is we don't have a ton of natural disasters that's going to change the landscape significantly. We don't have a ton of hurricanes or major, in our areas. We don't have tons of flooding, so our landscape pretty much stays intact. So that's good. We don't have earthquakes. I shouldn't jinx myself. Our landscape is pretty much steady. So I think whatever you have, just you will, just send it to Renata and me, and we can't have too little information. We can't have too much, right? So, and it's all going to matter in some form, in some way, at some point. It's all going to be important at some point.
All right, thank you. So it looks like we have the next meeting set where we have a pretty full agenda for that meeting already. We're going to be pretty busy. So I think we can move on unless from new business to public comments. Was there anything else that needed discussing before we move to the next agenda item? Or did we pretty much cover so far? Okay, it looks like everybody's good with that. And there is no public here, so I will go to committee member comments next. Does anyone from the committee have anything that they want to add tonight? I guess I will take a point of personal privilege here to just say how happy I am that this is happening. Thank you, Gail, for your spark with your email, and Renata, Sonia, for doing the background stuff on this. And just your email alone, Gail, had a lot of information for that will help with the grant, and I'm just very grateful. I can't tell you how many meetings near the end there we went to quarterly meetings because we couldn't get a quorum. I mean, how many meetings did we sit at, Gail, where no one showed up? So it's great to have people who are here and willing to meet and do the work. And, I'm just couldn't be happier about that. So thank you for all of your interest.
Yeah. having a grant writer too now is,
Absolutely.
Yes.
We did not have that before. So that huge,
And
huge.
a good
asset.
one at that.
and we
Certainly.
also have, Bernadette, I don't know whether you know, but the land acquisition fund, we really didn't have, we only had like $30,000 in it before, and we've got not a significant amount more, but at least the town now is committed to making yearly deposits into that fund.
So that too is going to be important when we see grants, because that shows generally commitment from the town to the open space in general. So that part that the town funds this kind of stuff is going to be helpful.
So it's a line item that is actually going to be funded on a regular basis now, which was something that never happened for decades. So that is huge, just that alone. And if that's you moving that along, Gail, which it probably is, thank you for that too.
You're my rock, Bernadette. You were the initial spark.
Well, I thank you for all of it. So if there's no other
I
committee
have a
members.
question, actually.
Yes.
Does anybody know like where we are, like with Cedar Crest and that whole thing? I guess there's like remediation that's needed, and weren't they talking about like the state was going to donate that to us and then they kind of stepped back on that? Does anybody know like where we're at with that?
I don't know. I know years ago there was talk about the state deeding it to us, or if we showed interest, but because of the remediation that you mentioned, and it would be so costly, and I think it's just until it's done, it would be a huge liability. I don't know that the town was particularly interested in taking it on from the state either, but that's just what I'm remembering. If anybody has any more information about that, please.
I do not.
Okay. If you would be able to find out any information on that.
I have it as a question, yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Oh, Renata, you were going to ask the town manager, is that?
I will
what you
ask.
meant?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I will ask.
cool.
So he's going to be notified. Do we need to notify the town councilors? And so we don't need to do anything like that at this point.
Would you like me to invite the town manager to the meeting on the 28th?
Do we think that's too early? Because
I think that would be an opportune time actually to have some things answered.
If the rest of the committee members are good with that, then let's go ahead and
if he's available. I
that
don't know if he's going
invitation,
to be available.
that would be great.
He could even zoom in. You know, if we have access to zoom somebody in, that'd be fine.
Well, why don't you extend the invitation, Renata, and we'll take it from there.
I will.
Okay. And if we need to have an additional meeting with him after that, we'll do whatever is necessary. And if nobody else, oh, go ahead, Gail.
I have a question regarding the Cedar Crest property. I know the buildings and whatever, the contamination was a big deal, but I don't know how many acres it is and how many of those acres have buildings on it and how many of those acres were just maybe green space. I wonder if we can find that out, because maybe we can just purchase the green space part of it or something. I don't know.
Looks like Renata is writing that down.
Yeah, on the map, it looks like it's a decent sized chunk.
And I
Not as
think
big as
part of it
Belleville.
is even, part of it might have some steep slopes, might be a part of that too, which is, yeah. Well, it looks like Renata's on that. Was there anything else before we adjourn?
Did you want us to do anything in particular to prepare for the next meeting, Bernadette? Or do you want to see how the next week or so goes. And then if you feel like you want to ask us to check into something or look up something or find out something or reach out to people, do you want to let us
I
know?
would,
Or
I think the only thing that would be a good idea would be to take a look at the plan of conservation and development.
Mhm.
Renata, did you say you sent that to everybody?
I
Or
only,
could
s-
you?
I only send the action sheet. The plan of conservation and development is available online. I can send everybody a link. The open space is a chapter on its own, and the chapter before that is dealing with natural resources. I think both of those are pertinent to you.
Mhm.
So if you want, I can just email the link to everybody and then you can read it at your leisure.
I think that's a great idea. All of us reviewing that in the next 2 weeks is the only thing that I can think of, unless anybody else has anything that they think. Okay, hearing none.
I just want to say thank you, Bernadette, for his willingness to be de facto president or chair.
Oh, well, I wish it wasn't
Thank you,
de
thank you,
facto.
thank you.
I didn't, if I knew I could do this as de facto, I would have by now, but thank you, everyone.
Well, we'll undefacto you as far as I'm concerned. You're undefacto, you're the chairperson.
If that's the worst I'm called, then okay. I'm sure there are other ways to describe me, but I'll take de facto too. So can I have a motion to adjourn
So moved.
and a second?
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, everyone. And
Thank you.
we'll
everybody.
see you in 2 weeks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Aye.